why don't we just have you both start off with Aunt Helen first, and just introduce yourself, and then we'll move to Dad.
Okay, I'm Helen Eva Brooks, Symington. I live in Campbellford, Ontario, Canada.
Where were you born?
I was born in Niagara Falls, Ontario on September the 24th, 1926,
Okay.
in the Niagara Falls General Hospital.
Wow, I think a lot of us were
I'm the
born in
oldest of
Niagara
the
Falls
family.
General. All right. Ralph?
Well, I'm the second one of the Roland and Eva Brooks family. The second one, the middle one of three, and had a brother, his name is Ken. But we were all born in Niagara Falls. And my earliest recollection, well, I was born in 1929. And my earliest recollection that I can remember was standing in the window of the little house that my mother was had a problem trying to keep it clean. And those were days where we had problems with little bugs that was running around. But I remember standing on the window ledge somehow, I'm not sure what it was, watching for my dad to come home. That's my earliest recollection. I don't really remember. I was probably about 3 years of age, something like that. But, my dad had a hard time keeping a job because of his condition of having asthma. But he was a good, honest worker, a good man that everybody loved and everybody liked. And when he died, both my sister and I and my brother, we really felt we really lost greatly.
That's Roland.
That was Roland, yeah.
Now, why don't you tell me a little bit about Roland, where he was born and when he was born, if you know all that information.
He was born to John and Annie Brooks. Annie Brooks, my grandmother, was a Slingerland. And Slingerlands came from the border of Holland and Germany. Oosterhouse was my grandmother's side of the family. And my dad was born in Bracebridge. He was his father had been married the second time. First family, he had 3 half-brothers. Then he was the oldest. He was born in 1902 in Bracebridge. And then
Dad
there
was the oldest? I thought Aunt Lila was the oldest.
Oh, that's right, too.
Yeah.
Aunt Lila was
Dad was the middle one of 3. 2 other were girls.
And Olive was the baby.
Yeah.
And that was
in Bracebridge.
That was John Brooks's second marriage?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
To Annie Slinger.
Annie, yeah.
And they had half brothers?
She,
Yes.
before they got married, she was entered an ad in a paper, and John Slingerland was looking for somebody to look after his household.
John Brooks.
John Brooks, because his wife had died and he needed someone to help, so she answered it, and that's how they come to meet.
Okay.
And eventually got married.
Do you know if they were close to the step brothers and sisters?
Yes, they were.
They were, okay.
I have met them. There's
Yeah.
Uncle Bert is the one that I have known. They all moved out to Manitoba.
Okay.
But there are a lot of the Brookses that are still
alive.
in Bracebridge.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Plumbers and yes.
Yeah.
there's
Okay.
I knew a
Ian
cousin
Brooks
of mine, Ian Brooks,
Ian Brooks. Still
and
lives
he
in
was
Bracebridge,
in Bracebridge,
Ontario.
grew up there where my dad originally came from.
And I was back to Bracebridge, the Free Methodist Church where they attended, for their 110th anniversary. And I met some of the fellows, people that my dad went to Sunday school with. And then we went back to the farm. It was Macaulay Line, I think is where they called it.
Yeah.
And some people had bought the farm and they were just going to tear the house down, and I happened to be there and I took pictures of the house with my present husband, Bill. And
Do you
I'm
remember
standing
what the
in front
house
lawn.
looked like? Was
Yes.
it,
I have pictures of that and I should have brought those with me, but anyway, it was a two-story house, an older frame house.
was there any paint on the outside?
No.
Or it was just
No,
rough boards like a lot of those old houses are up in that part of the country.
and the weeds were up about this high, and
Yeah.
Bill and I were standing in the weeds and having our picture taken in
Yeah.
front.
There's a lot of old pictures that are around where my dad and my mother spent time up there when they were first married, up in the rocks. It was
And I have several of those
several
pictures.
of those pictures around.
Now, what did Roland do for a living?
Well, he he grew up as a farmer, and the farm
In
was
Bracebridge?
was a base for them. They were pole barn builders. They did a lot of construction work, and that was what he learned. What he eventually taught me how, and from what he told me, I was fourth generation of construction that he can remember, going back that far on the Brook side. Do you remember anything else other than that part of his life?
Well, Dad was a carpenter.
Yeah.
Built every house that we ever
Ever
lived in.
Yeah.
Was, except for that one,
Yeah.
in transition from Toronto back to Niagara
Yeah.
Falls.
Well, he built the one in Niagara Falls too,
Mhm.
and the one in Crawford Street in Stamford.
And when I was born, my mother and Dad attended the Baptist Church, Jefferson Street Baptist Church. And guess I done a lot of crying when I was small, because they didn't want babies in the Baptist church crying, so Dad said, I know where we can go where they'll take us. So they went to the Free Methodist Church in Niagara Falls. And I was taken there as just a little, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks old. Wasn't very much. And at that time we lived on Armory Street in Niagara Falls, which was my grandmother's, Annie Slingerland's brother, Uncle Leonard Slingerland, who was my dad's uncle, owned a house on Armory Street. And most of the Brookses lived in that house.
You might mention too that he was one of the original Free Methodist ministers out of the East Ontario Conference.
Uncle Leonard Slingerland.
Uncle Leonard Slingerland.
He was an evangelist.
And he was a big, heavy-set guy, and he used to pull some real fancy things on you when you were sitting at the table. And he was great for telling stories. He could tell you stories that had happened years and years ago. And while you were staring and listening at his story, it was very, very often he'd be stirring a cup of tea, and he'd pull the spoon out that he was stirring that cup of tea, and he'd drop it right in the back of your hand.
It was hot.
It was hot. Now, I'm not sure if that was to show his
Yeah.
meanness,
No, he was
but he
just
was a
having
good
fun
guy,
with
and
his
everybody loved him.
This was Annie's brother.
Brother.
Okay.
Uncle
Yes.
Leonard Slingerland,
Yes.
who was a minister in the Free
Yeah,
Methodist
now
Church.
they're originally from around the Toronto area. But the old homestead though, off that side, is
Yes.
Niagara
St.
at
David's.
St. David's. And
Just,
the old sod hut house that they lived in, which was about a mile off the road, far as I can recollect, I was told it was still there.
Yeah, I remember going back to where it was.
And that was when they had done had come from Pennsylvania and come across the river,
American border.
the American side, and that's how the Slingerlands
In the 1800s.
in the 1800s, and that sod house is still there,
They pioneered there.
and that would be on
On
now
the Creek Road.
your great grandparents.
So they came across from, Slingerlands came from the United States
Mhm.
to
Yes.
Canada.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Now, were the Brookses already in Canada? Had they?
Oh yeah, they were originally from England.
Okay.
Yes,
They were,
Oh, that's right. You mentioned.
yeah.
Okay.
But that has nothing to do with Grandma Brooks or your grandma.
Right. Eva.
Yes.
Okay. Why don't you tell me a little bit about her background?
Yeah, she had an interesting background that was had very much an impression on her life. She grew up not knowing really what it was like to be a little girl long enough to enjoy being a little girl. I think at the age of 6 or yeah, she was one of three.
3 girls in the family.
There was Elizabeth, who was the oldest, and then there was your grandma Eva, and then there was Laura, which was who never came to Canada. Elizabeth did, but Laura stayed and always in England.
Her name was, she was, they were daughters of John and Sarah Ellen Gurney. And my grandfather, Uncle John Gurney, played in the band in the Salvation Army in England. And then they started to go to the Baptist church, and Mother sang in the choir in the Baptist church in Keighley, Yorkshire. I have pictures of that church, and she sang in the Messiah.
She was a
She was a
soloist at
beautiful
one
singer.
time, yeah.
And then when her mother died, she came to Canada in 1924, came across on the boat to see her sister Aunt
But you might
Lizzie.
back
and
up a little bit and say that she was the sole support of her mom and dad till they died, of which she, I believe, was 36 or something when they died, and then.
And that's when she came over in 1924?
She was born in 1890.
Okay.
And she came over in 1924.
Okay.
So that'd be
So she was
34 when she
34.
was, yeah.
Okay.
And it's interesting to see how she met. Dad, she was, I remember the house, it was on Huron Street and in Niagara Falls. And she was visiting some friends, her Aunt Lizzie, and then had come from St. Catharines to visit some friends. And Dad happened to be Roland Brooks visiting at the house next door.
His uncle.
And they were introduced to one another. And that was in the summer. And they were married in November, on November the 19th,
Yeah.
1925.
But you might back up a little bit, and the side that I remember was that Dad asked Mother, the first night he met her, if he could take her home on the streetcar.
Mhm.
And the streetcar was the mode that you got around.
From St.
It
Catharines.
was, and that was a ride on the streetcar of about 12 miles. And so he took her home, and he did that quite frequently, I guess, from what I understand afterwards. And they finally got married, what, 3 months?
Yeah.
But another part of that story on Grandma was the fact that she came from England to Canada, and that she came to visit her sister. And her sister lived in St. Catharines, and that was the one that was, her name was Elizabeth. But she came to visit her because she had a little girl that she just loves, and she knew of her. She was born in England, and her name was Marjorie. So, but Mother was on her way to Australia to live. She had a girlfriend that moved to Australia, she never got to Australia because Dad stopped her and they got married.
So she never did get to
Never
Australia.
got,
Is that
never
right?
got, they just wrote
She
back
got
and
letters
forth.
from
And
her
I
friend
remember
in
different
Australia.
times getting stuff from Australia, a palm leaf that was, I forget the name of the palm leaf. It was very green, hard, and it was rather an unusual piece living in Canada where we had no palms.
So she had a friend in Australia that
Oh,
she
yeah.
was going to see. I
Yes,
see.
she
Okay.
was a girlfriend from England that had gone to
Girlfriend
Australia.
went to Australia, mother came to
Yeah,
Canada to
and she
visit her
told
sister.
Mother about how Australia was and how great it was, and so you see, Mother originally was dating a boy who had gone, a young boy had gone to the First World War, and he was one of the guys of several thousand that was killed with the gas that they used in the First World War. And I guess they were very much in love, and that's why she was trying to leave England and leave the memories that she had at that point.
I see.
So now she was on her way to Australia, and there was all kinds of men in Australia. And that's one of the reasons, I guess, that was the drawing power.
And she never had to go because she met
She
Roland.
met Dad.
Okay.
Yeah.
So at that point, Roland decided to stay in Niagara Falls. Is that why?
He was in
He
Niagara
was
Falls.
living in Niagara
Oh,
Falls.
was
so
working.
Okay.
Working there.
He was
yeah.
working
He
in
worked, in
Niagara.
fact, he worked on one of the first, on one of the bridges they were doing at that time. And that was
Is that the
going
old
from
rickety
Niagara
bridge?
Falls to Niagara Falls, Ontario to Niagara Falls, New York.
Is that the old rickety bridge that used to?
I'm not sure
Scare
which
us.
one,
Well,
but he,
first of all, he worked across the river
Yeah,
in, in Gilman's.
Gilman's printing.
He worked for, he painted the Rainbow Bridge. He was one of the ones that painted the Rainbow Bridge.
Wow.
But that
Yeah.
wasn't one of his first jobs. He,
Now, where's Bracebridge from Niagara Falls? I assume it's north.
Well, if you
Yes.
know where Toronto is, it's about 150 miles straight north.
Okay.
And it's one of the longest roads in Canada is called Number 11 Highway out of Toronto. But you go up through Barrie, you go up through Aurelia, and you eventually get to Bracebridge.
Okay. And we might say also that St. Catharines is a suburb of Niagara Falls?
No, it's another town 12 miles away.
Okay. All
Now,
right.
I think it's now part of Niagara Falls.
Is it?
Not yet.
Okay. And Eva was in St. Catharines with her sister? Is that where her sister
Yeah.
was?
Yeah,
And-
actually, it
and
was
she
called
would-
Thorold's where they were at.
Okay. And she was visiting a friend, next door neighbor of, that was a friend of
Her sister.
hers,
Their
okay.
side, yeah.
Okay,
So
so
that's
she was
how-
over there with her sister at a
Yeah.
friend's house, and Roland was next door at his uncle's
Yeah.
house.
So you can really
Okay.
kind of see the way that the good Lord brings people together, if
Yeah.
that's the plan.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All right.
when she was in England, she was 12 years old. She had to go to work. And she went to work at a mill, a woolen mill. And she finished her schooling. They had to go to work at 6 o'clock in the morning. They had to work 2 hours. Then they stopped for their breakfast. And then they had to go on and work for the rest of the day. And Mother was very smart in school. She could spell very well. She could read very well. She loved to read. And she loved to knit, crochet. She brought some of her work with her from England. She brought doilies and very fine work that she, do you remember the clock, the mantle where the clock
Yeah.
was sitting?
Yeah,
And this real fine lace work, and she had made it in England and brought it with her. She brought several things with her. Karen has one of the things today, which was her dresser set, which was black ebony. Karen has the box. Karen has the mirror and brush set, I believe, that Grandma brought
Yeah.
with her from England.
we've refinished that black mirror set that,
Oh, have you?
yeah.
You refinished it? Now, it's pretty obvious that Grandma was 12 years older than Grandpa, is that correct? 10 years older.
Yeah.
Now, at that time, was that
Yes, it would be
1902, 1890, yeah. So at that time, was that, back then, was that looked down upon, or was it even discussed or anything? It
Yeah.
wasn't
I think
anything
so.
odd? Okay.
No, there was never, but she was a typical English lady. She had her English dry humor about her that if you really didn't know her, you had no idea she was trying to pull some kind of humor. And it was in our own family, in Dad's family, it was recognized that she had her way. And they'd say, well, that's our Eva. No matter what, that's Eva. And that's what Aunt Olive would say, and Aunt Leela, yeah.
And did she ever get back to England?
One time, her and Dad went,
And Elaine.
and
My daughter
Really?
Elaine went with them in 1970.
Really?
When Elaine finished high school, she finished her grade 12, and that September, Mother and Dad and Elaine went back to England. Mother hadn't seen her sister since she came out in 1924.
Is that right?
She
Wow.
went back and saw
45, 46 years.
where
Yeah.
she had gone to school and where she had gone to church, and everything was so changed from what, of course, where she went was where Aunt Laura lived, and that was a suburb
London.
of London.
Yeah.
So it wasn't up north in Yorkshire where she had lived. So it was different. Everything had changed.
Right, you were mentioning
We
Crawford
were
Street.
mentioning the many houses that Dad built in Niagara Falls, or in Niagara, in Stamford, basically where it was. How he got started to do that was he wanted a house of his own. He did not like paying rent, and he wanted, so there was a big house that had been caught on fire, and he had the opportunity of tearing that house down, and what was good he was able to keep. And this was during Depression time, and the Depression was really a rough situation. You can't really imagine it unless you've gone through it. And of course, Helen and I were small kids at that time, and I can remember the house getting half built, and it was the front two rooms of the house that he had planned on, and this was all being built by lumber that he'd gotten. There was a small roof put on it, but he knew that he was going to enlarge it. So the enlargement came to the point where the roof came off, and had enlarged the other part. Now he was going to put a roof on immediately. But he didn't have time. It rained. And it rained, and it rained, and it rained. There was no stop. It rained almost 2 weeks. And he had a few friends. He was able to go and get the tarp and cover over the top part of it, but it just laid with water up there. And I can remember him and Mother having some, as a little kid, I was still about 4.
You were very old.
I was 4, 3 or 4, but I can remember that. And that's where in fact, I remember traveling up the ladder, going up to help Dad. I wanted to be up there with him. So I got to the back part of the porch. I don't know whether you remember this or not, but I was up there and I slipped and I fell off the porch, and my foot landed on a piece of 2x4 that had a rusty old spike in it that came from that burnt house, and it went right through my foot. And I remember going to Dr. Smiley, and he was our family doctor. He was the one that was involved with bringing us kids into the world, along with Mrs. Dayful. Wow, this is bringing back
Good.
thoughts.
Good. That's great.
And Mrs. Dayful was the midwife for most of the families in the Free Methodist Church in Niagara Falls. Whenever a new child was born, it was Mrs. Staple that was the one that came to the house and took care of us. And I have a picture of sitting in the grass with Mrs. Staple at this house on Crawford Street, Ralph and Irwin and myself, because Aunt Olive lived 2 houses down the street on Crawford Street, Aunt Olive up at Graydon. Irwin was born there, and he was just small.
Yeah.
And I have that picture of the 3 of us sitting there with Mrs. Staple.
But
But then
there's,
Dad got
yeah,
sick.
Dad was,
We lived next door. Between the house that Dad built was another house, and it was called Taylor's Dairy, and they kept all their horses there. And Dad had asthma, and he would be sick all the time, and finally they sent him to the sanatorium and done this test to find out what was causing his asthma. This was when this test for asthma first came out, and they gave him all these needles, and I remember him coming home and saying the horses bothered him.
cats.
The cats bothered him, the duck feathers bothered him, we had to get rid of the pillows, and we had to, tomatoes bothered him, and when he found out what bothered him, we had to move. He had to go and find another lot to build another house, and this is, I don't know, I think there's about 10 houses or so, we should count them all in Niagara Falls that Dad built.
At this point, I was about 6 or 7, but Dad had a bicycle, and the bicycle was the means of transportation to go to where he was building this other house. Now, I used to ride on the crossbar to help him, and I would hold the tools that we were using. Well, one time that this was happening, the handsaw got in the spokes of the front wheel, and the front wheel collapsed. Dad fell, and I went right over top of the handlebars, and the bicycle was in a mess, so I had to bring the old bicycle back home, and he went on to the house. But I had to go, eventually walked all the way, and that was about 3 miles, I think, 3 or 4
I don't remember
miles.
which house he was building now.
That was on Crawford Street. That was the one on Crawford Street.
The first one he built. Crawford Street was.
Or not Crawford, Cedar Street in Niagara Falls.
Yeah.
That was,
Now,
That's where you and I pretty burnt the house down.
Oh, yeah.
pardon me?
No, we just about burnt the house down.
Is that right?
Mother
yeah.
was sick, and Ralph and I had to do the washing, and I got my arm caught in the wringer. I remembered that.
Wow.
And this one time we were cooking food,
Yeah.
and the fat started to get hot in the frying pan, and I took it to the sink and put water on it, and it just blazed up and caught the curtains on fire. We went over Aunt Olive and Uncle Graydon lived behind us,
within another block from us, and
and we had the fire engine.
unbelievable. Fire engine came. That was the house too that I got scarlet fever in.
Yeah, we all got
We
scarlet
all
fever.
got scarlet fever. I
All
was
summer
2
long,
months.
we were
Yeah.
placard on the house.
Yeah, big red card.
Nobody
Is that
got
right?
near
Yeah,
us.
we were
Everything was
quarantined.
placarded. There was.
How old were you two?
Oh, she was about.
I was.
We moved to Toronto about 19. Well, we were about 6 or 7. Helen was 3 years older than I am.
Was old.
She was about
must have
10.
been 10, 11.
Yeah.
Oh, I think I was older than that.
So
Because we went to move to Toronto and then came back to that house.
everybody got scarlet fever, including grandma and grandpa?
No,
Oh, okay.
No.
Just us 3 kids.
Okay,
the kids, we had it real bad.
okay. Wow.
Ralph went to a Sunday school picnic, and he ate spaghetti, was it? And
Oh,
you blamed the
I
spaghetti
wouldn't
to
eat
give you.
spaghetti on for years.
That caused him to have scarlet fever.
Yeah,
We couldn't
have a
convince
big
him
spot
anything
on my
else.
lung after scarlet fever. About 50
Wow.
cent, size
Yeah.
of 50-cent piece.
And
So you almost burned the house down at that house, and you got scarlet fever. So that wasn't a real good luck house.
No.
Well, that was a pretty
That
good
was-
house because then we had a neighbor across the street that, it was Gay's Bakery that was downtown on Queen Street in Niagara Falls. And one of the brothers lived across the street from us. And so they went to Grace Gospel Church. So we would go to the Free Methodist Church Sunday School in the morning.
Morning.
And in the afternoon, we'd go to Grace
Grace
Gospel.
Gospel.
And they'd always challenge us with, learning memory verses, and you would win a bag of candy, and a bag of candy
And
came
she
from
was
this.
always the one that would win the candy.
Yeah,
And she was the one that could learn, she learned
memory verses.
she learned the
I
books of
remember.
the Bible, and I don't know if you still say them yet or not, but she could rhyme
Mm.
all the books of the Bible off, and I couldn't handle all that memory work. I still can't. It was a challenge.
One year I had to learn, one year it was, at the Free Methodist Sunday School, we had, $5 silver was the prize, and you had to learn 6 months memory verse. And I learned it all, I had 3 mistakes. And I got the $5 silver, and at that time I had poison ivy. That's when we still lived in Crawford Street, because the streetcar tracks ran behind our
Yeah.
house from Niagara Falls to St. Catharines. And there was poison ivy there, and we kids used to go and play down
Used to
there.
play in the car
And I
banks.
got poison ivy in my eye at that time.
Oh, my.
And I remember saying that I didn't wanna go because I looked terrible, my face was all red and itchy. But I said my memory verses, and I bought myself a winter coat with those $5 silver, and I can still see it today, it was a royal blue winter coat. That's how I got my winter coat.
Wow. That's cool.
Yeah,
Now, there's a street in Niagara Falls named Brook Street.
yes.
How did
It's
that
after
come
your
about?
grandfather.
Well, that's a long ways yet from where.
Yeah, it's a long ways from this
Oh,
guy.
I'm sorry, okay.
From where
All right.
Dad got back to, he worked at Bentley Sporting Goods, and him and George Simpson decided that they were going to go and start their own business in Toronto. This was 1939. He made crokinole boards, ping pong tables, tennis rackets, badminton rackets, so they thought they could go into Toronto and start their own business, which they did. So we moved to Toronto. I always remember that because it was when Clark Teal was born. Wilbur and Sylvia
Yeah.
Teal also went. And we lived on 356 Sudan Avenue,
And went to
Off
Morris
of
Cody
Mount-
School.
off of Mount Pleasant in
Yeah.
Toronto. Went to Morris Cody School, went to Eglinton Avenue Free Methodist
Free Methodist
Church.
Church.
It didn't have a top on it, it was just a basement.
Yeah, they didn't have enough money to put a top on, so it was all in the basement.
And that's where Mother bought a sewing machine, Singer sewing machine, an electric one. And she didn't wanna go and take the lessons, so she sent me, because there were free lessons that came with this Singer sewing machine. So that's how I learned to sew, and we made curtains for the upstairs. Do you remember, there was a big porch on the upstairs?
I sure
with
do.
all glass
Yeah.
windows. I made curtains for that. And then she
How old were
decided.
you then?
Well, I'm 39, and I was born in 26, so
13?
then she decided that she was going to buy me a piano. So they went and got this piano, and then I took piano lessons from this Uncle Leonard Slingerlands, who lived in Toronto at that time, and his daughter, Merle.
Merle.
Taught piano lessons. And my grandmother, or Aunt Nellie, which was Uncle Leonard's wife, Aunt Nellie, she taught piano lessons, so I had my first piano lessons in Toronto. That piano has gone with us everywhere, and with that piano has a lot of stories
A lot of stories.
about every time we moved. But anyway, Dad didn't, and we lived there for almost a year. And that's when I first remember Christmas as a real impression on me, because North Toronto at that time was where all the elite lived. And do you remember them driving us around all the streets?
Yeah, all
and
the blue
seeing
lights.
all the
All
lights
the
on
blue
the
lights.
houses?
Yeah.
That was 1939
Yeah.
and 40.
Then the war started. The Second World War.
But
Was that?
We didn't stay in Toronto very long. We moved back to Niagara Falls.
Back
That's
to
when
the
we
other
moved
house
into that house
on Cedar
that
Street.
had little crawling things that,
Cedar
Dad,
Street.
Dad had to go, he got that lot on Cedar Street and he started to build that house. We moved in when the house it had a roof on it, and, it didn't have much of anything. We stayed up nights pounding lath. I can remember nailing lath on the wall for the plaster, and
That was before we moved to Toronto. Then we came back and was only in that house for about 6 months, and Dad sold the house, and then we moved to Stamford.
Well,
I remember doing all that
Yeah,
stuff,
but
and I was very close to Dad working with it.
we were put back in school
Oh,
because we
yeah.
were in Toronto. We went to Maple Street School, and
Yeah.
I was put back in
So
grade
was I.
7 at that time. Then we went, where?
We went to Stamford, and that's where all the houses were built.
Dad,
On this little
On
farm, Dad
Portage
bought
Road.
4 acres of land. He was quite a, he didn't have a lot of education, but he was sure a driver. He pushed to make his living, to make it happen,
you only went to grade 4
yeah.
in school.
And, Mother was a very penny pincher. It was always said if you owed her a nickel or a penny, she'd tell you. If she owed you a nickel, you get it. No way, no question about it. She was
But-
as honest as the dollar is long.
But we always had food
Oh,
on the
yeah.
table. Even though a pound of butter went a long ways,
Yeah.
she would say, scrape it on and scrape it off.
Oh, yeah.
You had it,
Toast in the morning, but you scraped it.
scrape it on, scrape it off. When she came across the boat, from England, she was so sick, seasick, and they had grapefruit. And she'd never had grapefruit before. She ate grapefruit all the way across because that was the only thing that she could keep down. We always had grapefruit in our house.
Yeah.
Mother was always, grapefruit was there. Whether
But
we
she
had
would
anything
clean that-
else,
She would clean that grapefruit out like there was
nothing left.
nothing left,
She
absolutely
loved ice
nothing left.
cream.
Yeah, same with
She
ice
licked the
cream.
platter
She licked the
clean.
platter clean. Yeah, she didn't care who saw her, but she
They
licked
didn't
that
have
platter.
those things in England.
Yeah.
Never had one of
She,
those. Yeah.
She appreciated that.
Yeah.
I remember when Dad worked at Bentley's Sporting Goods, and Mother would get the bus and go downtown every Friday, and she'd wait for Dad at noon to get his paycheck. He'd sign it, she'd go and cash it, and then she'd go shopping and getting groceries, and then when Dad was through work, he would
pick
go
her
and
up.
pick her up, and then we'd go back out to Stamford. That's
Yeah.
where,
We would.
it was Stamford at that time, that's where he started building this other, he bought a farm.
4 acres.
Beside St. John's Anglican Church at Stamford Green, which the roads come this way. One is number 8 Highway and the other one is Portage Road. And this green, and this point here, it was the Hawkins family,
Yeah.
and then St. John's
St. John's
Anglican Church,
Anglican, and then our,
cemetery, and then Dad bought the farm there, and he built, I don't know how many houses on that
Several
piece of
houses.
property. I remember when he got that piece of property, and to build the to dig the cellar, he had shovels and a big scoop.
with horses.
We all worked, we all dug that basement out. And I remember shoveling dirt and putting it on the scoop, and then somebody would drag it out. We had
Yeah.
rope on it, we had whatever way we could get that dirt out of there.
Then we had friends of ours that come and lay up the block, and they were called Howlets. And they were masonry contractors that Dad had good friends
They
from
lived
where
in-
the other house was.
Yeah, they lived downtown on Huron Street.
So then, there was,
Falls.
there's so many things happen now that you're starting to talk about, when Dad fell off.
That was the house that Dad fell off the
He
roof.
slid off the roof. No, that's not true. It had rained, and we had a homemade scaffolding that was anchored to the existing wall of the house. And when it stopped raining, we didn't reinforce it from the sogginess of the nails had no strength to hold the scaffolding. So we get up, start working, and immediately it fell down. And we were both on the scaffolding. I landed in a garbage can that was full of water with both feet stuck out, and I had my bottom stuck in where the water was, and I just plunked right in that thing. And Dad fell and hit 3 on his
He hit
stomach,
on the edge,
and he
broke
hit
his
on
ribs.
concrete and broke 3 ribs. So
Right.
having asthma, broken 3 ribs, and we were the
I-
only ones home
Yeah,
with
Mother was
him.
away
Mother was
somewhere.
visiting some I think it was Aunt Olive at
I
that time.
remember taping his ribs up. No, we took him to the doctor.
Yeah.
The doctor taped the ribs up. And then when he came home, he couldn't stand it. So I had a razor blade and I was cutting this this tape all off of him because he was,
I remember that too.
he was going crazy with that,
Yeah,
with the itch
Mhm.
of that.
yeah, I remember that.
So we did get that house built, and I remember in the front room, Dad had, a little hatchery, an incubator,
Incubators,
and he had eggs in there.
that's
He
where we
was
used to
hatching
raise
chickens
young chicks.
in our front room.
And we had hundreds of chickens.
Really?
Yeah, and Helen, I don't think Helen had as much, but I was very, very much involved with looking after feeding and cleaning out those chicken pens. And I ended up with fungus in my eye that was attributed to the fungus that you get from being around chickens.
And I ended up with it in my eyes and
Yeah.
in my lungs. It's called
Yeah.
histoplasmosis.
So that was,
And you get it from chickens.
you get it from chickens, and we both have it.
And we grew up with those chickens being hatched in our front living room.
Yeah,
And this is in a house on that farm that
Yeah.
you
The
built?
house is still
Okay.
there.
yeah,
Really?
It's still there. And then Dad built another house between that house and the cemetery. He built another house, the same thing. Then he sold it and it was moved up, to the north end,
yeah, yeah.
south end of Niagara Falls. It's still there. Then he built another house on the same spot for Mother's sister and her husband, Aunt Lizzie and Uncle.
Yeah,
They came and lived there for a little while, and Aunt Lizzie died, and Uncle Fred went back to St. Catharines, and then some friends, Whitmore's came.
Whitmore's,
And Dad, to the Free Methodist Church in Niagara Falls, and so Dad said, well, they could come and live there. And then he built another house on the other side, and he put another addition on the back of it, so it was a duplex.
yeah.
And
But our mother was so, she didn't want anybody else to live in those houses until she had. So we had to move from one house as it was finished, almost finished, never was finished. We always moved into it before it was finished. And we can remember in the wintertime when the ridge pole up at the top of the roof, I don't know whether you can or not, but I can remember you could see up there in light, and the snow would come down and the rain would come down, and you'd get wet or you'd get snow on you. You'd wake up in the morning with snow on you.
take a glass of water to bed, and it would be ice.
Yeah, the next morning.
There wasn't heat in they didn't have furnaces in those days much. They had Quebec heaters. And so we heated with Quebec heater in the kitchen and one in the front room. And then they'd leave the door open and let the heat go upstairs. And that's how there was no heat up there.
We used to go to bed with as many clothes on as we could get on. We had as many on going to bed as we had if we went outside.
Mother was a good cook. She made rice pudding. She made Yorkshire pudding,
Rice pie.
rice pie. She used to make Christmas cakes, and she was always canning peaches, and I remember them used to make what we call potted meat.
Yes.
And I remember one time Dad bringing the pig head home,
Pig head
sitting there right on the kitchen table, and Mother was,
She'd attack it.
get it out of here. Dad had to clean it all
Strip it.
out, and you made this here potted meat. It was pork and beef, and you let it set, gelled, and it would be sitting in these round granite tins, sitting on the steps as where we went upstairs because it was cold up there, and it would sit there and get nice and cold, and that was what we ate a lot in the wintertime, was what they called potted meat.
Is that like head cheese?
Yes, you got it.
All right. Wow.
Homemade head
But it was
cheese.
homemade head
Wow.
cheese, and it was delicious.
Yeah.
It was delicious.
We used to put it in our sandwiches and take it to school.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. We had a long ways to walk to school. Well, for public school, we didn't have so far. It was maybe almost a mile to SS number 4. But then when I went to high school, I had about 4 miles to walk to high school from where we lived. And then Dad sold.
I never went to high school. I only got to grade 7.
And did you finish high school?
I got to grade 10,
Okay.
there was no buses, there was nothing, and it was cold in wintertime trying to get to school. And I was lucky that I even got to grade 10, because Dad had to have transportation to work. There was no buses back there to go to school.
Mhm.
No
The year
buses
af-
to go
The
any
year
place.
after I quit, they put school buses on. Dad sold that farm and bought a piece of property over on St. Patrick Street, where you were,
That's where you were
where
born.
Brian was. But this was before you were around. Dad bought this piece of property, and, no, wait a minute. Before he did that, I got married.
Yeah,
I married Fred Black in Stanton, which was called Market Street at that time, but today it's called Stafford Green Drive. And I went over to the farm, which was across this green, as I say.
but I was married from that house too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
This was
On
the house
1945,
on that farm.
Portage Road.
Yeah,
Okay,
and I
Portage Road.
moved into a little house that was originally made from, well, was known many, many years ago, but we never recognized it. It was known as a chicken coop. And that's where Richard was born. But then the farm was sold.
Well, I got married from that house, and that was in March 1945. And went over to live in the farmhouse.
Yeah,
Where I lived for the rest of my life until Freddie died in 1975. And then Dad, you got married from there too.
I was married in 1947, 48, something like that. And,
And
was
then
there
Dad
for
sold
about, we were there for about a year or two after we were married. Farm was sold then.
They subdivided the farm, and that's when Brook Street was named after Dad, and those two houses are still there. Besides St. John's Anglican Church, the cemetery, then there's the first house that Dad built, then there's the other
Second
one that he
house.
built beside it, and it's a duplicate, and that's right on the
Yeah.
corner of Brook Street and Portage Road. And that was named after
That was
Dad, and that
Dad's.
was our farm.
Yeah.
And all those streets, there's Harold Street, and I don't remember the
It's
names of
named
the
after
street.
the Brooks, which is
All behind the
what
church.
you have as your,
And this is, something that we have to remember in Niagara Falls, is that farm was named,
Yeah.
and he sold it to Branscombe. And then he got that piece of property over on St. Patrick
St. Patrick.
Street.
But he got it from a guy that, he had been,
He got it from Robinson,
Yeah.
didn't he?
yeah. But I got it from the old gentleman,
Yeah,
Robbins.
old
Yeah.
Robinson. Then
So-
he built that
Yeah.
house on Portage Road, or on, St.
St.
Patrick Street.
And that's the one that we lived in?
Yeah.
Yes.
What's the number of that house?
742
Two.
St. Patrick.
742 St. Patrick Street,
Yeah.
it's still there.
Or it was 1907 Vine, the house we lived in before that. That was where
You and Dorothy.
Richard, Karen, and Peter was born in that.
Which was a converted chicken coop.
No, that was a new house we moved into.
Oh,
When
okay.
he first
From
got
that.
married, he was in that little.
So
Yeah.
we moved from Vine Street to St. Patrick Street.
That's right,
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
And that was across from our farm that was on Stamford Green Drive, at what actually was Market Street, and that, from
Yeah.
where I married and went to Fred Black and Grandpa
So
Black.
Grandpa Roland bought the property that was on both sides of St. Patrick Street, correct?
No,
just
just
the
one
one
side,
side.
All right.
just one side.
Would
Just
that
about
have been
one
the east or
lot
the west
there.
side?
Just about one lot there.
Oh, okay,
You-
just
you-
bought the lot that
yeah.
we had.
And then
Okay.
when he wanted to move out and move over to O'Neill Street, that's when,
He built another
your
house.
mom and I bought that house.
Okay,
And, he built two houses again over across from where the high school is now.
Right.
A and Meyer High School, there
Yeah.
are two lots there. The first one was a brick bungalow, because Mother was sick. She had heart problems, she had arthritis, and, he built that bungalow first. And, but there were steps. and she still couldn't get up those steps very well. They used to go to Florida every winter,
Yeah,
and she got quite sick down in Florida.
yeah,
That was in the 60s,
yeah.
and
That's-
we all had to go down, Ralph
Bring 'em
and
home.
Ken and Esther and Freddie and I
Drove
all drove
the
all
way.
night to get there, and she hardly recognized us when we got there, but she revived a bit, enough for Ralph and Dad and Mother to fly home, and Ken and
That was an
Esther,
interesting flight.
Ken and Esther brought Dad's car home, and we had gone down in our car, Freddie and I, so we drove the two cars back in a snowstorm. It was terrible in Pennsylvania, in the hills of Pennsylvania. The plows hadn't been out, we couldn't see where we were going. We ran out of gas. That was when we done a lot of praying. We couldn't find a gas station open, and we ran on an empty tank of gas for a long time. We ran on prayer. And we found a gas station open in Fredericksburg, Pennsylvania. And we just kind of collapsed there almost. We found some gas. We were going to get home because we didn't know whether Mother was going to make it.
Yeah,
So we drove home.
but it was amazing though, she revived from that, and she lived, outlived Dad by 3 years, I think. Was it 3 years?
Dad died in 1977, June, and Mother
Yeah.
died in 1981, September 1981.
He died of cancer, which
Of
was
the pancreas.
pancreas. And Mother just died of old age.
Broken heart, I guess.
Yeah, lonely.
Tired of living.
And they were both living on O'Neill Street when they died.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, then Dad built another house beside the first one on O'Neill Street, and it was right on level ground. And then
It was attached to it, wasn't it? It was a
Yeah.
duplex, wasn't
no,
There was,
it was a garage on the end, and he
and
turned
you
it
turned that
into
into a
an
little
apartment.
apartment. And you
Okay.
put a garage behind where you used to go with him,
it? Right.
back in the garage, and he would
He just
play
took our
with you or
shop.
work and show you how to do certain things.
Right.
Dad, when I married Freddie Black, we had two children, Joanne and Elaine. And Dad and we had the greenhouses and the farm. We had market gardening. And Ralph would come over and help us fix up the old farmhouse.
Yeah,
It was pretty well
it was pretty
falling
much,
apart because of
yeah.
the depression, no
Yeah.
money.
no money.
Couldn't fix up the farmhouse, we didn't have any running water, we didn't have any bathroom. And
No,
so
and you had a furnace.
Dad came over, we
Yeah.
had a wood furnace and a
Yeah.
coal furnace. Dad and Ralph came over and helped us, and we pretty
We
well
put a new
rebuilt
kitchen
that.
in for her, put a new bathroom upstairs. But Freddie did a lot too. Freddie was pretty handy. He did a lot for himself, but,
We had greenhouses, market
Yeah.
gardening, a couple of hundred fruit trees. And Dorothy, your mother, used to come over and help us get ready for market. You used to maybe remember all those things, Karen and Ricky and
yeah.
Peter and Elaine and Joanne. Lots of fun.
Now, I remember Freddie Black as being really into ham radio.
He was
Yeah.
he wasn't in ham radio, he was in CB.
CB radio.
CB radio.
Okay.
It's
And-
Bill that I've married now.
Okay.
Freddie died in 1975.
75.
Got hurt in the greenhouse and got what they call endocarditis. He run a ice pick into his hand, and it went directly into his bloodstream. And the bug hit on his heart valve, so he died within less than 3 weeks.
We had a good upbringing. We had a good time. We used to have a lot of fun with the family. Used to do a lot of
Farm?
singing. Used to do a lot of. Dad to me was the most meaningful Christian I think that I have ever met before or since.
Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Dad was recognized, I believe, as one of the most stalwart Christians in our church. He was a pillar. He would recognize young people properly because he was very young at heart within himself. He was always he always liked to kid around. He always enjoyed doing things, probably much more than what Mother did.
Dad
But
was the one that
he
was
was
full of
always
fun.
teasing the grandchildren. He enjoyed his grandchildren too. There was nothing better than his grandchildren, as far as he was concerned.
When Joanne first got her job, she worked at a travel agency downtown on Valleyway, and Dad worked at Bentley's. And Dad used to let Joanne drive the car home at noon hour. He was the one that taught her how to she
How
got
to
her
drive.
driver's license. She
Yeah.
she drove the tractor on the farm, but she didn't drive the car, and Dad was the
Yeah.
one that let her, but when he wouldn't tell Mother, because if Mother knew that
Oh yeah,
that
that
Joanne
would
was
be,
driving the car, then that
that would
wouldn't
always
to
be taboo.
But if Joanne was, she's downstairs there now, she could tell us a few things too about Grandpa and how he loved his grandchildren.
Yeah.
And what he,
But Dad at church was the, when he passed away, there was probably one of the largest funerals that had ever been.
he had his exhorter's license
Yes,
to preach whenever there was a
Need.
need.
yeah.
The minister
And
was
he
sick
did.
and even with his grade 4, he learned to read, and he loved his Bible. His Bible was
Prior, the only thing he ever read.
I can remember coming home, Dad coming home from work, and as teenagers, it was when we lived in Portage Road there, teenagers like to get into, you know, doing things that their parents said, no, you can't do it, but anyway, we'd sneak out somehow. But I would remember Dad coming home from work, and he wouldn't. He believed in praying, fasting and praying, and he wouldn't eat his supper. I can still see him go to the bedroom, and I can still hear him praying for his children. And that is a heritage that I will never, ever forget. Him praying for us,
Yeah.
and I can still hear him to this day.
And a real burden
He
for.
cared about us.
Yeah. He was a
in a
very
way.
simple man. I
He loved us.
remember him as, if there was something serious to be said, he would say it in a very precise and short. You understood what he said. And when it was serious, he wouldn't say much, but you knew what he was saying. But when he was happy and he was around with his family and his sisters, and
He played the mouth organ.
yeah, he played the mouth organ.
He played the juice harp.
And his 2 sisters, they would both play the piano, and we'd sing around. His brother-in-law, Graydon, would play the guitar, and he also played the mouth organ. And we used to have some real good old-fashioned sing-songs around the piano.
Didn't he? No, I've just heard stories about him, either at the beginning or the end of a sermon, stand up and give his own testimony too.
Oh, many times. Oh yeah, he would have such blessing on him that the Lord put on him that he'd find himself couldn't keep still.
His
In
leg was
fact,
out.
he had a problem with his left leg, and I and Helen, we probably used to sit back at the church when we were young kids because we felt we were big enough to not sit at the front where they sat, but we sat there and we would recognize Dad starting to get blessed. He
Yes,
couldn't
called
control it, and his left foot would start tapping. And we didn't have carpet on the church floor, so it was a hardwood floor, and you could hear Dad starting to get blessed. He could only handle that for so long. He'd have to get up and start walking, and he'd walk across the front of the church where the altar was, and he'd be crying. The tears were running down his face.
Now, was this in the middle of a sermon?
Well, no, I think it was at the end of the sermon when
Okay.
they would give the altar call.
Yeah,
Okay.
When he would
But
have the
what
burden for.
we used to have what they called love feasts, and it would be then,
A
and the
lot of
love
it did,
feasts
yeah.
too, that
He'd start testifying.
breaking of bread,
Mhm.
and we'd have to have
Yeah.
that. We were raised to go to church, to Sunday school, Sunday mornings, and to church Sunday morning and church Sunday evening. There was always enough gas in the car to get to church. And then Wednesday night was prayer meeting, Friday night was class meeting. We were always there, even if we fell asleep.
And Dad was the class leader.
And we would, he was a class leader for part of the time, yes. I can remember that little Sunday school, basement Sunday school, remember up at the front, there was the
Yeah.
wooden,
Yeah.
table with about this deep,
Yeah.
full of sand,
Yeah.
for the little kids to play in.
Yeah.
And, Dorothy, Bush was a teacher, I remember when maybe you remember Dorothy Bush
Mhm.
being a Sunday school teacher. Were you used to go there on
Mhm.
Huron
Yeah.
Street?
Mhm.
You were also there when we had the new church
Right.
built
Mhm.
out on Dorchester
Yeah, but
Road.
getting back to Dad, he was one that, he couldn't control the blessing of the Lord on him. And he would go across with his hands in the air and he'd say, young people, it's real, it's real. And he'd be talking about what God had done for him in his life. And it was just a marvelous, at times when we were kids, we kind of felt, well,
Right.
it was bothering us, but no. It was something that was real, very real.
And it never bothered the pastors at all or anything?
Oh, no, they themselves, well, there was not just him, there was
Sure,
several people
sure.
in the church that were,
Wilbur Teal, I've
with
seen
blessings
him
that they
slain.
would have on them they couldn't control.
I remember one time when Wilbur Teal's wife was sick. His first wife was very sick, and he wrote a book. Wilbur Teal did.
Yeah.
Do you have that? I loaned it out, and I think I loaned it to Ralph, and I have never got it back. But I don't know where it is. Anyway, in that book, Wilbur writes about needing some money, and he was praying about needing some money. And as Dad was driving home, we lived out in Stamford in Portage Road. Wilbur lived on Menzie Street
Yeah,
by the Fairview Cemetery, and Dad got partway home, and when the Lord spoke to him and said, Wilbur needs some money, you go back and give him some money. And Dad turned around and went back and knocked on Wilbur's door, and all Dad had, I think in that book, I don't know, I think it's $5, but it was the amount of money that Wilbur needed for medicine for his wife. And when he wrote this book, it's in that book.
Is that
now Wilbur was one of Dad's very best friends we're
Yes,
talking
very
about.
close.
And they were buddies. There's another story there that was unbelievable in reference to him becoming a pastor. I don't think he went to school. He went directly into being a pastor. But there are so many stories that Wilbur himself has that us as kids
He had
can
to write it
remember.
Now, Grandpa wasn't always a Christian, was he?
I think
As long as I remember.
Okay.
he became a Christian.
He was raised in the Free Methodist Church in Bracebridge. He, like all the rest of us, went out, I think, for a while, away from the Lord.
Okay.
But when I came along, he went back to church,
Mhm.
and we were always in church from it. I don't remember my dad not being a Christian.
No,
And Eva
I never
was
heard
always a
Dad
Christian
swear.
also? Okay.
She was always a Christian.
I never heard Dad swear. I never knew him to smoke. He told me he smoked a pipe when he was a little bit younger, but he never swore, never
Never
smoked
drank.
a pipe, never drank.
Wonderful Christian man.
I can recall when I was a kid growing up, and the things that we couldn't do
Mhm.
were we couldn't go to shows, we couldn't go dancing, we couldn't be where we would feel like it was part of the devil's things that was going on.
Mhm.
So I wanted to do things like I wanted to go to the show, and I remember going to the show one time, and I sat in the back of the theater, and I sat close to the back so I could get out fast if there ever got a fire there. I mean, we
Your
just had
conscience was bothering you.
things that was taught to us that it was not right for us to do certain
I
things.
still can't go to the show today.
Really?
No. I have, but I don't feel comfortable.
Mhm.
so I don't go. I remember my mother's sister, Aunt Lizzie, Elizabeth, when she died, Mother and Dad took in our cousin, May, and because they took in May.
Yeah.
Because Vera and Alfred were the others, and they were on their own. But May was younger, and their dad drank a lot. And so Mother and Dad took our cousin May, Lyle, in and took care of her. And that was when Ken, about the same age as Ken. Now, Ken is 8 years younger than I am.
He's 5 years younger than me.
He's not here to help us out with this today, but Ken lives in Burlington, in Ontario. But May was raised with Ken pretty well. They were pretty well the same age. May needed a lot of things in those days, and Dad took her to the dentist and had her teeth fixed. And when she got married and left and went to Welland, they lived in Welland, she needed, her and her husband parted. There wasn't, it didn't last for very long. But she needed some things and Dad was the one that went and took her and got her a set of plates of teeth she needed badly. Dad was always doing things for that family. But today it has paid off. May has a son who is a Free Methodist minister. Vera has a son who is a Free Methodist minister. So it's carrying on because I believe my dad's prayers were answered.
Yeah, definitely.
And
wow.
it's gone. That's on my mother's side of the family. And Jan and Tom, they went to Wilmore, Kentucky, to the school there. Then when they came back from school, they had no place to live, so they came and lived with my second husband, Bill Symington, who I married in 1975, December 1975, after Freddie died. And Tom and Jan came and lived at our place for that first little while.
I never knew that.
So that until they got a place to live. And we took them in and had a great time.
Of course, we've been my family and myself, we've been away from that part of the country for how long, Brian?
23 years.
Yeah, and a lot of things have developed here in this part of the country for the Brooks family and grandchildren. And right now, Helen visiting us is a pleasure to be sitting here thinking about all these things, that one thing jogs another and jogs another, jogs your memory a little bit. So.
We do have to wind down soon. I just wanted to touch on a little, we've got about another 8 minutes or so. I wanted to touch a little bit more on Eva. She came from England, but more of her personality. I mean, she was a disciplined woman, correct?
Oh yeah.
And
very English, very.
She was from Yorkshire, and Yorkshire people, the one of the houses that they sold to was a Dr. Cooper. He lived on O'Neill Street across from the high school. You probably remember. He said one time, people from Yorkshire are a very
melancholy.
Yes, very melancholy, and.
But he also said why.
They were very depressed people in that area.
And there was a reason for that too.
Very negative.
If you worked in the coal mines like your great-grandfather did, and had nothing to protect you other than just yourself, you would get the black lung disease, and you also had the gray overcast. There was the sun hardly ever shone there, from what he said. And you really got an attitude, I asked him one day myself, why is the attitude that my mom has, and I recognized it in him. He says, well, you would have too if you had ever come from that part of the country. So it was a very depressed, it was coal and cotton. If you didn't get it with the coal, you got it with the cotton. Your lungs would fill up.
Now, she moved from there after her parents had died?
Yeah,
Yes.
before she
Okay.
moved from there, though, she did very well at her job. She, in fact, was the head of a certain, I'm not sure how many girls or what department, but I just remember her telling me that she was very much involved with the production
She was a weaver.
of it. But the part that I can remember her telling me, when she was a little girl, I guess she wasn't very tall, she used to have to stand on a wooden box that they built for these little kids
She
and
was
to
only 12
operate
at
their
that time.
machines. And I can remember, I thought she started a lot younger than what you said.
No, she said she started when she was 12, and that's too young even then.
Yeah, she was working
But
under
she'd go to work at 6 o'clock in the morning.
children's, there was no children's labor law.
Yeah.
They just utilized the kids to their discretion. And England being the kind of country that it was, there was no respect. It was always the ones that had the money, they kept it. And the ones that didn't have it, you just shuffled for the best way that you could.
So she had worked for 22 years before she
Yeah,
came over
yeah.
to the United States. Wow.
But she was very discreet. She, in her own way, let you know how she felt.
Uh-huh.
And there was
She
a lot
loved to knit.
yeah, she was a knitting
Loved
machine.
to crochet.
A knitting machine. She could almost knit a sweater.
And I have a daughter, Joanne, that's just like her. Knits, crochets.
And we
that's
have
what
evidence
Mother
of that now?
always done.
Pardon?
Nothing.
We done the dishes. Mother would go and sit down, and she was disciplined in us, in raising us, because we had our jobs to
Oh,
do.
yeah.
I mean, we cleaned the house, and
I can remember,
Ralph, every time Ralph would clean the house, we'd all leave, because when we came back, furniture was changed around,
Uh-oh.
everything was vacuumed and cleaned, but he didn't want anybody around.
I
So he-
felt like if I was gonna do something, I wanted to do it right.
And I always had to do all the dusting, and I learned to bake from my mother, I learned to cook from my mother. I learned a lot of things from mother.
And she was a smart lady too.
She taught us.
Uh-huh.
We would always complain, you know, I can remember standing on a chair doing dishes.
Uh-huh.
I couldn't.
Didn't hurt you.
No, didn't hurt you either.
No, it didn't hurt us at all. We thought we were having
A hard
terrible
time, you know, we'd complain about it, and this is how hard she was. I can remember one time complaining about it, and,
Be positive, remember the Sunday school lessons.
No, I gotta tell you that she would say, well, what do you think we got you for?
Yeah.
And that stuck with me for a long time. And that's the kind of hard, you know, she didn't have an easy life.
She was older, and she
you know.
when I was born, she was what, 36, 35, 36?
And she still had kids until she was in her 40s.
Yeah.
And Ken is the baby of the family. We always had company on Sundays. Someone was always invited home after church.
Mm.
And we had a nice round
Big round, yeah,
table,
yeah.
pedestal, old-fashioned
Yeah.
table.
And I can remember the chairs, what they looked
Yeah,
like.
and there was always somebody.
And I was a
we
big
had
lanky
company.
kid, and I was always rocking back on these chairs, and I'd periodically fall on the back and, yeah, get in trouble,
And we always had roast beef and Yorkshire pudding for dinner on Sunday.
yeah.
That was always, and peaches. Our dad would bake a cake, and Dad liked to bake, and he would always make a white cake with coconut filling, top and bottom icing.
Well, when he was a young fellow, he worked in the lumber mill,
And he was a cook.
cook in a lumber camp.
That's where he became a Christian, that's
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
Through Allen,
yeah,
Reverend David Allen,
yeah, way up northern
before he came to
Canada.
Niagara Falls.
Okay.
He was in Bracebridge.
Yeah, but he was up there long enough that he just got so homesick. He was away from his mother and his sisters, and he went there to help support the family.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when he heard the gospel, where he had gone to church in Sunday school. That's where he accepted the Lord, was in this
Yeah.
camp through a Reverend David Allen,
Yeah,
who spoke.
but there was one question that was asked to him by Irwin, and I remember being with Irwin being our cousin, first cousin. His mother was Aunt Olive. He asked Dad one time what he thought about playing cards. And the playing cards to Dad was the worst thing in the world, because he learned how to gamble when he was in the camp. He learned how to lose money, and what really got him into problems. And he said, all I could see of those cards was the devil. And he says, I would never, ever have a set of playing cards in my house again.
Yeah, there never was.
Never was. We never had anything like that in our house.
Well, we were able to pay Old Maid
Yeah,
or Flinch or.
Flinch was our game.
Crokinole was our game. We all played crokinole and pickup sticks. And Uncle Graydon and I used to have contests with pickup sticks, and I could remember it was right till the very end that he and I would. One time he'd win, next time I'd win, and it was always
Yeah.
the crokinole was great. for our
Your
family.
great uncle was he also was a wonderful Christian. And
Uncle Graydon.
Uncle Graydon,
And Aunt Leila and Uncle Garn were
Yeah,
too.
they
Dad's
were
older
all-
sister.
people that were, you know, there was nothing that you couldn't be proud of in that family. They were just wonderful Christians. Yeah.
And they all died with cancer.
Mm.
Aunt Olive died with cancer. She had stomach cancer, she had breast cancer. Aunt Leila had stomach cancer, breast cancer. Dad had pancreas cancer. And I guess it's fallen right along because I have had cancer 3 times. And still fighting it. So it's in this family. Marie's family, which is Aunt Leila's oldest, or second daughter, her son Barry has just been buried with cancer, and so we have these problems.
Well,
in
the
our
main
family.
thing I think that we would like to say before we get off here, to those that down the road that would see and hear about this little conversation we're hearing back and forth here, is that our main life right now is that we both have a heritage in Christianity.
Yes.
Not so much in monetary, that's so minute, but the love for God in your heart, and the love for Jesus, and the love for knowing what He can do for each and every one of us in our family, and the ones that our family contact. That probably is touching all these little things, are human things that happen to us, but the most important thing is that we know down deep in our heart that we're ready. And the only way you can do that is that we ask God to forgive us of our sins. That probably, if we can say that to our family, is probably the best thing we can ever leave them.
Okay.
We love Jesus. I love Jesus with all my heart.
Amen. Okay. Well,
He's the
thank
one
you.
that's got me through a lot.
Yeah.
He's there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
He's
it's like
there.
Grandpa says, it's real.
Yeah.
Sometimes we wonder where he is, but he's there carrying us.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both very much. I really appreciate the time you've taken here, and so do future generations.
I don't know whether we said who our children were.
Oh yeah.
Now
Why don't
the
we do
next
that?
generation.
Oh,
Why don't we
yeah.
do that?
Our,
Do you wanna go first?
well, I guess I'm the oldest one, we're going off. My children, by my first husband Fred, Black S. Joanne, who was born in January 9th, 1946 in Niagara Falls. And my second daughter is Elaine, Jeanette Elaine, who was born in 1950, February the 23rd. And then my husband died in 75, and I remarried, and I have a stepson, Leonard Symington, who lives in Toronto. I married Bill.
Well, we have 4 children, Dorothy and I, and Richard being the oldest. I believe he today is he's got to be 47, and he has 3 girls and a lovely wife, Debbie, and then came Karen, who is 46 or 45, and she has a young 18-year-old son right now, and 3 stepdaughters who are great people. And then there's Peter, and
I forgot to say that Karen was married to
yes, Karen being
Dwight
married.
Bryan Winters.
Yes, Brian, her husband. And then we have Peter, who is married to, I don't forget, I think he's got to be 45.
44.
44. As you can tell, I really don't recall the ages as well as my sister. Anyhow, and then came Brian, who is doing this interview, and Brian is 34. He's 10 years younger than Peter. That's how I happen to remember that.
Married to the
Married
most
to a
striking
lovely
woman
lady
in the
called
world.
April.
April.
And who has my first grandson to carry on the name of Brooks.
The first grandson
First
in the Brooks
grandson,
family.
right. And that's been exciting for the last, well, it's kind of exciting for the last 11 months because we had a possibility of another, and then it did happen, boy, yeah.
I guess Joanne has 4 children. Randy is married to Sandra, and they have 3 children, so I have 3 great-grandchildren, Rachel, Cody,
She's
and
old.
Brandon. And Joanne has Randy, Jamie, Timothy, and Rebecca. And Elaine has Jacob, who is in Montreal and Concordia, doing his 4th year at college, hopes to be a teacher. And Danny has just finished his 3rd year as computerized robotic engineering. He's now got a job with IBM in Toronto, and they have a little son, John, and she's married to Tom Cox. And then there's, I am married 2nd time to William Symington, Bill Symington, who has a son, Leonard, and he has 2 sons, William and Brian. Then there's Ken Brooks, who was married to Esther Brooks.
Unfortunately, is not here with
And
us.
he has 2 daughters. Valerie, who is married to Doug Dawson, who is our minister right now at Tilsonburg Free Methodist Church, and they have 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. And Janet is married to Larry McClung, and they have 2 girls, a girl and a boy, Jennifer and Spencer, and they live in Ottawa.
Okay.
We all have trailers at Wesley Acres, so that's where we spend our summertime, Ralph and Ken.